Hi Bindu, how are you?
Hey Stan, I'm good. How are you?
Doing well. So today I have the internet weather, and just for all of our viewers, the internet weather is how we keep up with the events on the internet, how we understand what threats there might be. And one of the ways we do that is by measuring scanning activity on the internet and profiling against different ports that might be targeted. So one of the ways we measure activity is by the volume of scanning against specific ports. And so many of our viewers are already familiar with the top 10 list here. So these are ports that are commonly scanned and basically have the most volume of scanning on the entire internet as we see it. And there's no surprises here. Everything that we see, we kind of see every week. For example, Telnet or SMB or SSL or SSH, RDP. But the ports that we're going to kind of concentrate on this week and dive into a little bit more is, of course, port 445 associated with the file sharing, but also with the WannaCry worm, and port 60,001. So this port, 60,001, we'll start with that. And the reason it's interesting is because last week it was in the 18th position of the top ports being scanned. And so it's jumped up 8 spots.
Okay.
This is something that we've talked about previously. Actually, I went back and rewatched an episode where John Hogelboom talked about this port. So let's see what's changed since then and what we've gotten. So here's what the scanning activity looks like. And you could see volume. This is about 120 days, it looks like. And you could see the volume is not that great. So the scale here is in millions. So you could see just a few hours ago, there's like 160 million or so at a peak flows per hour targeting this port, which is kind of way up from where it had been, a few months ago. Before the baseline, you could say on average maybe 20 million, right, most days, but now it's like significantly up. So to study what's happened, one of the ways we can do it is to see, well, how many participants are there scanning this? Is there any change in that? And we can see that there is, and this is much more pronounced graph. You could see I highlighted a couple of interesting points. So first of all, this is the number of devices that are all looking for this port or scanning for it at the same time across the internet, basically. And so you could see the scale here is in thousands. So you could see in late April here, there was a little bit of a spike. So maybe 500, maybe 700 devices at a peak, but about 100 or so sustained, you could see were scanning. And that was a little weird, but then the activity went away. And then here, towards the end of June here, about 2 months later, it looks like, the activity really shot up. And you could see now the peaks are about 2,000 IP addresses per hour scanning, and then they kind of trail off. And when we see activity like this, we know that there's probably a botnet, because generally when a bunch of devices start scanning all at once, it usually indicates a botnet. And what's alarming generally, and we see this pattern as well, is when the peaks start getting larger
and
larger, it means that the botnet is growing bigger and bigger. So you could see towards the end of June, we maybe had 2,000 devices per hour scanning, and then maybe towards the end of July there, we have just 3,500 devices scanning or something like that. And now you could see at the peak there's 4,500 devices scanning, which shows that something is going on. There's a growth in this botnet. Looking 120 days is also important because it helps us understand where did this activity come from, profile it a little bit, and track adversaries, kind of like Tom mentioned, tracking strong pity or something like that. So adversaries like that. Now, we don't know which adversary this is, but it is interesting to see the evolution of the botnet and what it impacts. So the other thing I like to do is look at it geographically, because sometimes it helps you to understand, is this botnet impacting a specific region? And you could see that there are specific regions highlighted. For example, like India and the Middle East and North Africa here a little bit, and actually pretty much all of Europe, I would say, Asia. So it's pretty broad.
Widespread,
It's very widespread. Number of devices is, I think in the last 5 hours, about 6,500 unique IP addresses doing this scanning. So doesn't seem like there's only a specific geographic area. That's why I kind of like this chart to help you understand the scope of this botnet.
Yeah, it gives you context. So.
Yes. We could see that the botnet has been growing over the past few weeks, and we'll obviously keep an eye on it, but we'll want to see, is the activity going to increase or stay the same? For that, we use a honeypot.
Yes.
So we can see who's connecting on this port and what are they trying to do against this port. So this is the last 90 days of honeypot records, and you could see the activity. We've seen it for a while. There's 593 unique IP addresses that have connected to the honeypot and tried to do something. Not all of this activity is the same. Some of it is like RDP scanning or SSL. But you could see the majority of it is HTTP. And when we break it down further, we could see it appears there's some sort of like an exploit inside of this shell parameter. So it's almost like you can execute commands. And so it seems like the way this botnet spreads is by taking advantage of maybe some sort of an unsecured parameter, some sort of a device. What's interesting is, we like to profile these and understand like what is the attack or what is special about the packets. And you can see the HTTP user agent string. This is what your browser sends when you visit a website. It's kind of strange. It's got these weird zeros and strange characters in it. That's also kind of not normal. And finally, there's actually a little bit of a difference if you look at all these payloads. And the difference is they're targeting different IP addresses. So there's at least 4 variations of this threat already like in circulation across these different devices. So it might indicate an adversary that's evolving over the last 90 days, trying different payloads, or it might indicate multiple adversaries that are all aware of the same vulnerability that are trying to take advantage of it. So very interesting. We're going to keep an eye on this botnet, track it, and understand how it might impact different customers and the internet at large.
Yeah, and I think because you have that trend over 120 days to be able to monitor something like this, and it looks like there's a huge uptick now. I'm curious to see what the next couple of weeks bring us in this.
We're discovering the beginnings of a new botnet. And by looking at the honeypot records, we're actually seeing that in the last 90 days, there are multiple different campaigns. So now we want to look at a report that's very similar. This is also scanning activity on the internet. But this time, it's organized or sorted by the most sources probing. So this is actually what we aim to do, is see, is there a botnet building or is there a bunch of devices all of a sudden scanning for the same port. And the 2 ports these are usually the same every week. So the 2 ports that kind of I want to review are port 445 TCP and 8291 TCP. And we actually talked about both of these. I just want to give a little bit of an update on port 8291 TCP. So last time we talked about it was last time I was on ThreatTraq, which was July. And this is what it looked like on the number of devices scanning. So one thing we had noticed then is that you could see, this again, the scale is in thousands. So there were these peaks that happened every few weeks where more and more devices would suddenly scan for this activity, again indicating a botnet. And again, you could see how it kept growing, which indicates maybe more devices being impacted. But sometime in early July, the activity actually changed a little bit and became sustained. So fewer IP addresses scanning at the same time, but continually scanning without ever stopping. And so it seems that whoever this adversary is, they changed their tactics and are trying to do something slightly different. So let's see what the chart looks like today. And so this is now a little while later, and you could see this is the last time we talked about it, and the activity has continued to be the same. So there's not more devices. It's about the same number of devices impacted. So maybe the botnet has plateaued in a sense, but that's kind of the update on it. So last time, and we looked at this and we said, well, what is running on port 8291 TCP? And it's actually a management port for this thing called Winbox, which lets you manage MikroTik routers. And there's vulnerability on it, and you can take advantage of it. And at least in 2018, there was this virus called Hajime, and it targeted these devices. So most likely, this is very similar. It's probably targeting either the same thing, it was definitely targeting the same exploit, but it might be trying to, maybe it's an updated version of this malware or an evolution in the botnet. But that's kind of what the activity looks like. And finally, we have the geographical distribution. Again, you could see how it looks like the geographic distribution for 6001, and at the same time, it does not look like it. You could see certain areas are much less pronounced than they were in the other chart. So this is the activity from I think July, and this is the activity from today. So you could see there are more devices now, even though the scanning is sustained. There are actually more devices,
the volume of devices increased,
participating, with not huge amounts. So about 6,000 or so devices out there in the world. You could see this botnet also kind of blossomed in a sense, and there it is. And finally, let's talk about port 445 TCP. So this is related to SMB file sharing, a very common Windows port. And I know you're very well familiar with it. And for our viewers, I know you are also very familiar with it. So what we've been doing is, every time I'm on the show, I like to review this activity and determine, are we increasing, decreasing in the scanning activity or the number of devices participating as part of this botnet? Just to understand, are we doing well with the remediation activity as the internet, right? As an industry, security industry out there in the world, how well is it going? First, I'd like to just highlight, right, the baseline for scanning was Conficker back in 2017. And then this spike here, that was the first time we saw this worm being used. And I remember that weekend because a lot of people got called in. There was a lot of media attention. If we zoom in there, you'll see it was a huge drop. But after that, very quickly, activity ramped up. But the interesting thing, we did notice a downshift. So that was April. So the next time we met, the activity stayed flat. And then it decreased. I hope I don't miss it. And then it decreased again. So it's a little bit of a quiz for you. That's not really a quiz. It's more of a, what do you think is your gut telling you? Will the activity decrease, stay the same, or increase in the next slide?
I'm going to say stay the same.
Stay the same. That's a good bet, because that's what happened. So it looks like today the activity is about the same. Number of devices is not going significantly down that are participating in this. And that's it. That's all for the Internet Weather this week.
Yeah, thank you. This is insightful because I think to see that all this data that you're able to collect, gather, and analyze, right? We see this amongst a number of organizations where we say you need to have a baseline, right? This is, as AT&T, this is what we do, right? But even within your own organization, you need to know what baseline traffic is, how these port scans work, and what is being scanned and probed.